Hello everyone. In my presentation today, I will be speaking on the mass demonstrations that erupted all over India in December 2019, opposing the controversial citizenship bill enacted by the Hindu nationalist government of Narendra Modi. I would like to start by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands I am standing on right now. The image on this slide is that of 82-year-old Bilkis, one of the most recognizable faces among the millions of protesters who marched the streets of India or kept 24 by 7 vigils in late 2019 and early 2020 to protest the controversial Citizenship Act, which was turned into a law. She was named as one of the top 100 most influential people of 2020 by Time magazine. The protests went on till the pandemic broke out and a nationwide lockdown forced the people off the streets. But first, let's have a background on what exactly the Citizenship Amendment Act is. India gained independence from the British in the year 1947 after being partitioned into two separate nations of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan and a secular India. The partition lines were drawn separating the Muslim majority provinces on both sides of the subcontinent, and hence the newly created Islamic nation of Pakistan had two wings, east and west. Uncertainty over the future led to the greatest migration in human history. Muslim families moving towards East and West Pakistan, while Hindus and Sikhs moving towards India in search of a safer haven. It is estimated that more than 12 million people crossed the borders from both sides, being torn apart from their roots and their birthplaces, and the ensuing violence resulted in the death of about 1 million people. Since then, there have been two more mass migration of inhabitants towards India in 1965 and then during the independence movement in East Pakistan, which resulted in the creation of Bangladesh in 1971. Apart from these, there have been illegal immigrants coming into India through the porous borders on both sides of the country. To understand the strategy of the current Narendra Modi government and the Hindu right-wing forces in its scheme of disenfranchising the Muslim minority of the country, one needs to take a note of the chronology of development since 1971. First came the Assam Accord of 1985, a 6-year long student movement in the eastern Indian state of Assam, which has a border with Bangladesh, resulted in the passage of the Assam Accord, which promised to identify illegal immigrants coming in from Bangladesh. Although Muslims of Bengali origin had been staying in Assam for centuries and were always persecuted as an outsider by the indigenous Assamese, that is, the people of Assam, a cutoff date was decided upon to identify who would be marked an illegal migrant and who a legitimate citizen of the state. This date was the 25th of March 1971. A National Register of Citizens or NRC was supposed to be prepared having the names of all legal citizens of India, which would follow from a National Population Register or NPR, a list of all legal residents of India. The NRC was not implemented by previous governments because of its controversial nature, but when the current right wing government came to power, it started preparing the Citizens Register and expanded its applicability to all over India. So the exercise of NRC will now cover not only the residents of Assam but entire India. Although it was meant to target the Muslims, but since there are many Hindu immigrants as well who cross the border to move into India, that means there remains the risk of Hindus being excluded from the citizens register as well. To address this issue, the Modi government enacted the Citizenship Amendment Act in December 2019, providing citizenship to Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, and Christians, virtually people from every faith other than the Muslims, from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. This means that the Muslims being left stateless, having been excluded from the citizens register, have no other option but to go to the detention centers being specifically built for this purpose. Thousands of protesters, Hindus and Muslims alike, came out on the streets in India against this draconian law, which threatens the citizenship of 200 million Indian Muslims with large cutouts of Gandhi's posters. Public parks were filled up with Muslim women demanding repeal of the law in the true Satyagrahi style of peaceful demonstrations. It all started with Shaheen Bagh, a primarily Muslim majority working class area in South Delhi, where women of all ages started a 24 by 7 vigil which lasted for close to 3 months. It inspired similar protests all over the country. Protests erupted in Kolkata's famous Park Circus Maidan on the 7th of January when a 45-year-old homemaker Asmat Jamil, deciding that she had had enough after watching on TV the students of Delhi's Jawaharlal Nehru University being attacked by the police and Hindu mobs the previous night. Park Circus is a public park in a primarily Muslim neighborhood in the city and has been the iconic venue of many Gandhian protests during India's freedom movement. Inspired by the sit-in demonstrations, protests started erupting all over the country with people from all faiths joining hands and marching for their Muslim counterparts. The most important and visible outcome of this was that Muslims again started reclaiming their position in political movements. The Muslim contribution in India's freedom struggle had been substantial, but with the gradual rise of the Hindu right wing, Muslims became almost invisible in the political space. With these anti-CAA protest movements, this community, which constitute about 15% of India's population, started to finding its voice again. India is no stranger to women-led movements. For example, the Chipko movement, where women from a Himalayan village stood for days hugging trees to stop them from being felled, or the anti-nuclear protests in Tamil Nadu led by women of in Thakarai fishing village in the southern Indian state. But the difference of the current anti-CA movement with the earlier movements lie in the fact that unlike the earlier ones, where people of all faiths were united by a common goal, in this case the women leaders were clearly marked by their religious identity. The men and women from other faiths joined the movement showing solidarity for their Muslim counterparts but stayed in the background, letting the Muslims take the center stage and fighting their own battle against the discriminatory law. The need for a unity of purpose, which is so necessary in a social movement, as explained by Madison and Scama, was most strongly demonstrated in the anti-CAA movement, even though the new law was supposed to be affecting only the Muslims, and this unity made the government uncomfortable. The government had used all its machinery to deter the protesters by cutting out electricity, taking away the blankets during the cold winter nights. Clueless on how to tackle the situation, influential leaders of the ruling party started giving incendiary speeches, followed by a couple of shooting incidents on the anti-CAA protesters. But the protests went on peacefully. Mobs were unleashed on the peaceful protesters led by the main Hindu nationalist militant organizations, resulting in widespread riots aided by the police force, in which 53 people died, majority of them being Muslims. This shocking image of a Muslim man being attacked by a Hindu mob captures the brutality unleashed as a revenge of the anti-CAA protests. Since the COVID-19 outbreak, many prominent Muslim student leaders and professors who have been active in the anti-citizenship law protests have been arrested and kept in illegal detention by the state under the draconian Unlawful Activities Prevention Act or UAPA, where getting a bail is next to impossible. The detention of 3-month pregnant Safura Zargar in the overcrowded Tihar jail grabbed international attention. While she was freed on bail after 3 months, another prominent student leader, Umar Khalid, is still under detention. But why was the Indian government feeling so insecure and helpless in front of a bunch of non-violent and unarmed protesters? The main reason for the overwhelming success of these sit-in protests was the fact that these were totally non-violent and along the lines of Gandhi's Satyagraha. The all-powerful, mighty Indian state, with all the state machinery at its disposal, is very much capable of handling violent protesters, and hence they were completely at a loss on how to tackle the non-violent Shaheen Bagh protesters. The Hindu nationalist ideology demands allegiance to Mother India or Bharat Mata, who is portrayed as a helpless Hindu woman, and her brave Hindu sons are required to protect her from foreign invaders. The Muslims are perceived as foreigners or the others in a country they call their home, where they have been living for the past more than 1200 years. So, while their own mothers and sisters, and hence Mother India, are to be protected from the male species of the other, to protect the dignity of the entire Hindu community. Similarly, to show the others their place in society, their dignity can be taken away by dishonoring their women. That's why the communal riots in India have always seen rape of the other woman. But in this case, in the anti-CAA protests, hundreds of Muslim women were controlling the narrative of the proceedings, and that added to the frustration of the Hindu mobs. Also, as Zakaria says, the sit-in protests, as opposed to the marching protests, evoke a strong sense of persistence and resilience. The protesters had all the markers of their Muslim identity proudly displayed. The women at the center were wearing burqa and the men surrounding them wearing beard and skull cap, all typical dog whistles for the Hindu nationalists. But at the same time, they were holding the tricolor and evoking national icons like Gandhi and Ambedkar, and holding aloft the Constitution of India and the national flag. Yes, even though Gandhi, the father of the nation, was assassinated by a Hindu nationalist, his name still brings a sort of legitimacy which even the fascist Modi government cannot tackle. Although the capacity of the method of satyagraha in bringing about a moral shift in the minds of a truly authoritarian fascist regime is debatable, what needs to be acknowledged is its undoubted ability to mobilize the masses. The sacrifice that satyagraha demands from its practitioners is always able to give a sense of moral legitimacy to the protests. In Urdu, the word Shaheen means white, royal, falcon, or hawk. According to Rafia Zakaria, these Muslim women have been fighting ferociously like falcons to combat bigotry, identity politics, and also misogyny. The metaphorical significance of Shaheen Bagh could not have been more apt than at this hour, when the resident women of this decrepit lower middle class Muslim settlement have made it into the epicenter of a mass agitation on their citizenship rights. They are the torchbearers of the protest to save the Indian constitution from neo-fascist forces. The women of Shaheen Bagh turned the protest into a celebration of democracy. They were singing, dancing, reciting poetry while fluttering the Indian flag. These resilient women of Shaheen Bagh, of varying ages, faiths, and social classes, are seen as role models by protesters across the country, who are now happily emulating their style of protest. The sit-in protests, as opposed to the marching protests, truly evoke a sense of persistence and resilience. There have always been demands from the Hindu right ever since India's independence in 1947 to declare India as a Hindu nation, in response to its neighboring country being established as an Islamic republic. But the founding fathers of the country had categorically rejected these demands, stressing on the point that the idea of India was about a sovereign, socialist, and secular democratic republic. The preamble to the Indian Constitution, shown on this slide, beautifully designed with plant and animal motifs, proudly declared the same. And with the passage of the Citizenship Act, that very idea of India is under threat. The liberal population of India knows it. Bilkis Dadi is aware of it. That's why she said, I will sit here till blood stops flowing in my veins, so the children of this country and the world breathe the air of justice and equality. Thank you.